Hello, everyone, and welcome to AP US History for Winners with your teacher, Mr. Johnson. Last time we talked about the ideas of no taxation without representation and the foundations of the American Revolution. And today we are talking about the American Revolution itself and the influence of those revolutionary ideas. So, if you are ready, let's begin. The first thing we need to talk about is the obstacles to victory for the colonists. What made this a challenging war to win? We're going to talk about two main ones. The first is loyalist opposition. So I want you to think for a second. Remember, what is a loyalist? A loyalist is someone who is still loyal to Great Britain, even though they're living in the colonies. And there's as many as 20% of this people in the colonies were loyalists. And this is going to make it tough for the Patriots to win this War of Independence because not everyone is a patriot. A lot of people are loyalists. So this means you might be fighting, your neighbor might be a loyalist, they might be working as spies. It makes it difficult to win. And the second reason is Great Britain's military and economic advantages. We need to remember that Great Britain is probably the strongest military in the world at the time. They had just beaten France in the Seven Years' War, aka the French and Indian War, and they just beat another major European power, right? They have well trained soldiers, they have a massive navy, they're going to be great, well trained generals. It's going to be tough to beat them in a military battlefield. And the other reason why it's going to be tough is that Great Britain has a ton of money. They have a lot of economic advantages. They have colonies all over the world, not just in the Americas. They have more money than the colonists do. And so that means they're going to be able to supply their soldiers with better equipment, better guns, better training, all that kind of stuff. So these are the two main obstacles to victory. However, we know that the colonists won. So why did they win? We got four reasons we're going to look at today is why the colonists won. First thing we're going to talk about is actions of colonial militias and the Continental Army. Now, what is the colonial militia? What's the Continental Army? Let's break those down a little bit. Militia is kind of like a ragtag group of soldiers who are not very well trained but still want to support the patriot cause. Some of these might be farmers or artisans that are trying to help out the patriot cause and fight, but they're not well trained. And the Continental Army is the official army from George Washington, who's just better training than the colonial militias, better funding, but still not as much as the British. So they have some key actions and some key battles. One battle, a group of battles to look at is the very first battles of the war in Lexington and Concord, where we see the militias playing a big role for the colonists. So the British in these battles are basically trying to take over an ammo warehouse that the colonists have. And the militias are able to defend and for a little while and kind of push the British back for a little while. It's not as ultimately successful in the end, but they're able to do as much as they can in Lexington and Concord, and that kind of serves as a surprise for the British. And then another key battle is at Bunker Hill, where we see the colonists fighting the British. And this is actually another loss for the colonists, but the colonists are able to do very well. They're able to cause a lot of casualties for the British. And there's this famous line in this battle where the colonists say not to shoot until you can see the whites of their eyes. What does that mean? So the idea is like, well, don't shoot until you're really up close because the colonists didn't have a lot of ammo. Remember, we know the colonists are not as well funded as the British soldiers. But even though they lost and the colonists are forced to retreat, Britain loses a lot of soldiers. They have a lot of injuries, right? And so this is like a moral victory for the colonists, and it kind of inspires them. They think, oh, look, we can do this. We can keep up with the British. Another reason why the colonists win is George Washington's leadership. We all know George Washington, our first president, but before that, he's the leader of the Continental Army. And he is a very charismatic and resilient and revered individual. He was also a member, someone fighting as a leader in the French and Indian War on the side of the British. So he has some experience. And over time, we will see how he is everyone respects him, like I said, and he really learns how to be a good military leader, which is going to vault him into being president eventually. So his leadership is key. Third idea here is the columnist ideological commitment. We need to think about why these two sides are fighting. Okay. The colonists are fighting because they believe in a Republican government. Think about last lesson, right? They believe in the Enlightenment. They're fighting for their freedom, their independence. They're using Thomas Paine's ideas to inspire them, right? They have all of these reasons at the core of for why they're fighting, whereas the British soldiers are fighting to just regain territory. They're kind of fighting. The soldiers themselves they don't really maybe believe in the cause as much as the colonists do. And so the colonists have this ideological commitment that's going to help keep them motivated in the fights. The last reason why the colonists won is assistance from European allies. The major European ally for the colonists is a country in Europe that is a big rivalry with Britain, with England. Who might that be? We should know this already. France. Okay, we remember from the French and Indian War, right? France already has a beef with Britain. Okay, and so America is going to get French aid. Ben Franklin's going to actually help out, get some French aid for us militarily, especially after a key battle called the Battle of Saratoga in 1777. This is a battle where the colonists again do very well, and so France is going to see maybe the colonists have a shot here. And so they're going to allow us some Navy and military support. They actually bring over a general that really helps train the Continental Army. And so this assistance is really beneficial for the Continental Army, and it helps launch them to victory. So now we need to think about the impacts of the American Revolution and the DOI, meaning the Declaration of Independence. These, how America is fighting the British, and we've come up with these founding documents like the Declaration of Independence. How does this inspire other actions around the world? College Board wants us to know that this is larger impacts than just in America. So we're going to see some revolutions across the world that get inspired. For example, in France itself, in 1789, shortly after the American Revolution, France has a revolution where they, kill the king, and they have a huge revolution where they're trying to give more power to the people. Again, very much inspired by the American Revolution. Haiti has a revolution. Haiti is a country in the Caribbean, and they have basically a huge slave revolt. And the leader Toussaint Louverture is going to help Haiti gain independence in 1804. So Haiti takes these ideas, hey, like we want to rule ourselves. We shouldn't be ruled by another country. And that inspires them to have a revolution. And then in Latin America, we see tons of Spanish colonies gaining independence in the early 1800s. One in particular is Venezuela. They gained their independence thanks to Simon Bolivar. And so what you should kind of know from this slide is College Board wants you to know that, again, the American Revolution and the Declaration of Independence inspires other revolutions. You don't need to know the super ins and outs of each one of these, but if you're able to name a couple of these and just talk a little bit about why the Revolutionary War and the Declaration of Independence inspired these to happen, that's going to help you out. Next thing I want to talk about is the push for equality during the war. And we're going to talk about two key groups. The first group we're going to talk about is slavery. And as we are fighting this war and America is coming up with their founding documents, some individuals call for the abolition of slavery. Now, abolition means the end of slavery, okay? And because if you think about the ideas behind the American Revolution and the Declaration of Independence and eventually the Constitution, right? All men are created equal. Some of these big, grand ideas, some people are like, well, shouldn't we carry this out, keeping slavery, African Americans in mind? And so some people want to end slavery. They want to abolish it. One state that does this pretty early on, or this is kind of their idea, is Pennsylvania. And they have something called the Gradual Abolition Law, which was passed in 1780. And here's what this does. First, it prohibits the importation of slaves into Pennsylvania. So no more new slaves can come into Pennsylvania. Second, all children born in Pennsylvania would be free, regardless if their parents were slaves. So we're getting away from that idea of chattel slavery. All the children of slaves are free. No new slaves can come in. So the thought here is that it's going to be gradual emancipation, gradual freedom. It's going to be slow, but it's going to happen. And that is a way that they're going to end slavery, not right away, but eventually. However, slavery, in the most part, is not addressed at the revolution in a meaningful way. And most people sort of hope that the problem would solve itself. A lot of people realized it was a major issue and this was going to cause conflict, but they weren't sure exactly how to do it or what they should do. And remember, a lot of these founding fathers who are forming our government and forming, coming up with ideas, own slaves themselves. So there's a little bit incentive for them to not end slavery. And many people also have this mindset that slavery is a necessary evil. So it's this idea that slavery is needed because their mindset is that slaves could not take care of themselves. This is obviously an incorrect mindset, but that's what they're thinking at the time. That's their point of view, is that slaves need their masters to feed them, to house them, to clothe them, or else they wouldn't be able to do it themselves. Obviously, we know that's not the case, but that's kind of how they rationalized continuing slavery. And so as a result, a lot of slaves, have to figure out ways to take care of themselves and push on through this disaster that they find themselves in at the hands of other people. They have to find ways to do the best that they can, given the circumstances that they're in. The other group that I want to talk about is women. Okay, and a lot of women start to call for greater political democracy. There's a couple famous ones we want to bring up. One is Abigail Adams. She's married to John Adams, who's helping form the new American government. And as that's happening, Abigail Adams and John Adams are always writing letters back and forth to each other. In one of these letters, she has a famous quote: "Remember the ladies. Remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors." So Abigail Adams is again saying, like, look, we have this opportunity. We're creating a new country. We're creating new rules. Can't we give women equality? Now, we know that this does not happen. Women do not get even the right to vote until 1920. But this is like the first seeds of women getting more support. And then we have Judith Sargent Murray, who's pushing for women to get more education. And that education is going to kind of come into our next piece, our next thing we're going to learn about, which is Republican motherhood. Now, this is probably a new term for everyone. Republican motherhood is the idea that women should be teaching Republican values within the family. And there's a new importance placed on women in as far as American political culture. So what are Republican values? These are the values that America holds dear: to be a citizen, right? These are the ideas of the American Revolution, what it means to be an American, especially for young boys. The women of the house were supposed to instill these values into their children. And we're also going to see increased educational opportunities for women. So in order to be able to do this education, now, again, it's not going to be true equality. We're not going to see anywhere near true equality for a long time. But what I want us to think about is, when we have to in this class think about context, and when we learn more about women's rights throughout the whole year, we learn more about African American rights throughout the whole year. The American Revolution is really the beginning of the context for these groups, and how we're going to see these groups continue to grow. It's going to take a long time. The change is not going to happen as quickly as it should have, but we want to understand how that change happens. And this is kind of the very beginning of all of that. So that is really it for today. So I want us to think about, again, let's summarize our big ideas. It's really important at the end of the notes. We go through a lot of details, a lot of evidence. Let's break it down into main topics. So write these down in your notes so that you're able to synthesize the information for yourself. 1, what are the obstacles to patriot victory? We talked about 2 today. Be able to explain them. 2, why did the colonists win? And what are those effects of that victory around the world? We talked about 4 different reasons the colonists won, and a few different examples of these effects around the world. Lastly, how did the Revolutionary War help different groups in America push for equality? We talked about 2 different groups and their push. That's it. So that's it for our notes on the American Revolution and the influence of revolutionary ideas. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time.